Halloween is nigh, and with it comes the sequel to the greatest 80s horror movie documentary of all time, In Search of Darkness Part 2. Come with us as we explore a world of horror with unheard stories and extra ooze. But it's more than a documentary, it's the Loop and Larry Halloween Geektacular!
In a world filled with intergalactic space battles, metahuman destruction on a global scale, and psychopathic serial hauntings, there's only one team who can make sense of it all. When your world is overrun with rampant pop culture, call Loop and Larry, Guardians of Geek.
All right, here we are, Loop and Larry, Guardians of Geek. What is this called, Larry? Our Halloween...
This is the Halloween Geektacular.
This is our first ever.
It is the first ever. And this is the most special Geektacular we've ever had.
That's
because
right.
We have a very special guest for
That's
the third
right.
time.
Yeah, it's our third time. So we thought we want to talk about 80s horror movies because they're the things that really influenced us. And you can't go Halloween without talking about horror movies, for sure. And so we got the expert, the one person we know for sure, and he's got an exciting new project as well. David Weiner's here. David, how's it going?
Happy to be back, Wilhelm scream or not.
David's coming to us directly from California.
That's right, Los Angeles, California.
What's the weather like?
It's always the same.
72 degrees and sunny.
Let's see, is there a fire outside? It's not fire day.
Oh,
Okay.
no.
Because it's Monday.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. The fire works on Monday. I think it takes the weekend off. I don't know.
Right.
Our brave firefighters are working overtime because half the state's ablaze. So not to make too light of it, but it's been pretty smoky as of late.
Yeah. Like it's pretty smoggy looking, or is it like, can you visibly see it on a regular basis?
These days, actually, it's quite good. But several weeks ago, it was so bad that there was like a week stretch where you weren't even really supposed to go out because you could smell the smoke, even though in Los Angeles it was miles away. It permeated half of the state. It was pretty intense.
Oh, wow.
And on top of everything else, now you have to deal with not going outside because of smoke.
Yeah, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
Yeah, could 2020 get any better?
Yeah. Woo. It's a classic, that's for sure.
Yeah, I just really made it a downer when you asked how's the weather. So
Yes.
anyway.
It's all right. Got to get it out there. It's got to be real, right?
We'll bring the mood right back up with a lot of gore and a lot of slashers.
Yeah, that's right. So, of course, you're the producer-director of In Search of Darkness, which we loved. We have a copy of it. Like, it's on Shudder right now, right? It's like, I see people always talking about it that have never seen it before. And then you go ahead and say, you know what? That wasn't enough. We got to do a sequel to this called In Search of Darkness 2. Tell me about how this came about and why. Why would you take on such a huge project once again?
Well, it was a nice thing that people were telling me that the first one wasn't enough. I thought it was more than enough. 4.5 hours is definitely a long sit. When you're surveying a decade, it's only scratches the surface. There's just so much. There were hundreds and hundreds of amazing movies that came out in the 80s, horror movies in that genre, just from around the globe. But after 4.5 hours, the greatest reviews that I could get from people were this flew by and I could watch another 4.5 hours. And I thought, another 4.5 hours. That gives me an idea. We just had so much amazing material that didn't even make the cut of the first one, literally for the time limit that we had. And I had done close to 50 interviews where each interview was an hour or 2 hours or sometimes more. So there's just an embarrassment of riches of great anecdotes, great stories, great thought processes, great insights. And we thought, how are we going to do another film? And we want to get a lot of the people that we couldn't get the first time around. And that was kind of the MO for this one. It was like, the focus for the first film was North American centric, and I wanted to get more of a world view. Two, I wanted to go into a little more of the deep cuts that we didn't get into because there's so much material out there. 3, we wanted to get a brand new faces, and that's something that we did. And 4, I just like to count.
That's very
it's,
cool.
It's not a horror anything from the 80s unless you have a sequel. So it's
Yeah,
you
exactly.
gotta have a sequel to make it an official 80s doc. So that's awesome.
At what point can we start calling this a franchise?
Well, people were already calling it they were calling it the In Search of trilogy, with Last Action Hero, In Search of Last Action Heroes, Darkness, and Tomorrow. It's all In Search of.
Right.
So that's kind of a franchise, maybe.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Well, I give it a franchise, sure.
We're going to name the next one In Search of a New Franchise.
Search of a search of.
Well, they all are. I imagine all of that is going to come together into another unbelievable 4.5-hour sit. Is it going to be extensive like that? Like another, like a 4 hour?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. We were going another 4.5 hours. It's going to be the same format from 1980 to imagine you watch In Search of Darkness Part 1. You get to the end. You went from 1980 to 1989. All these chapters in between. You're like, that was cool. I loved all these people talking about not only their own projects, but the projects that they loved and the movies they loved, and how this whole, it's not just the movies. It's the whole way we consumed this stuff. It's the movie art. It's the VHS experience, all that kind of stuff. It's the music, it's the special effects, it's just an explosion of great ideas. And we thought to ourselves, let's imagine you watch all that, you get to the end, and you start again from 1980 to 1989. A bunch of movies in each year, chapters in between. But this time it's got more of a worldview. There's a chapter on like Italian horror. There's a lot of Italian horror. There's Japanese horror. There's Hong Kong horror. There's Australian horror. There's New Zealand horror. There's 15 new faces that we got. So we're like, well, last time, that was cool, all that Nightmare on Elm Street stuff, but too bad they didn't have Robert Englund. Well, Robert Englund is here with us this time around. Wow, like Tom Savini was one of the absolute great splatter masters of the 1980s. Where was he? Well, this time around, we got Tom Savini, Linnea Quigley, Nancy Allen. I did 23 new interviews, and this is kind of with one hand tied behind my back because we had a 3-month delay with COVID and not being able to go out at all. And we have, of these 15 new faces, we actually had a bunch others. I don't want to talk about what we don't have, but we ran into the challenge of a lot of people who said yes, saying, I just don't want to go out. I'm really sorry. Just now's not the time. And I understand completely. So, and the shoots themselves were very, they were constraining in that, we all masked up. I social distanced, we only had myself and the cameraman, and that was it. Cameraman had his mask on the whole time, wiping things down, all that kind of stuff like that. A small studio where you don't have a bunch of people there, it's just us talking. And we were able to accomplish a lot of great stuff and get a lot of great material and a lot of, it's all new movies, it's all new thoughts, it's all new unseen, unheard stories. And I'm pretty proud of what we put together, because if you like the first one, this is more of the same, but it's a broader view, it's deeper cuts, and you get a lot of the faces that you hoped would be in the first that are now appearing in the second one.
There's so much too with 80s horror. Like there's so many different ways you can go and so many things. Yeah, that maybe you didn't touch upon the first one, even though it was pretty extensive, the first one. I'm really looking forward to this one a lot. Robert Englund, both Larry and I have met him at Comic-Cons or whatever, have photos with him. And he's so good with his fans. Like that guy is the best. Like I don't know how he is for an interview, but he must have had some pretty cool stories.
He invited me to his home, and we sat down on camera for 3 hours.
Wow.
And I asked him one question. I said, how's your day going? I said, how's the weather? And then he talked for 3 hours. and then we ran out of footage. And I'm like, oh, I should have asked him about Nightmare. No, he's wonderful. His stories are very descriptive, and he's a very intelligent man. And I've actually worked with him in the past when I was with Famous Monsters of Filmland. He came up with Heather Langenkamp and other folks for the Silver Screen Fest in Santa Rosa, California. And I got to have dinner with him 2 nights in a row. Prior to that, I'd interviewed him and Heather Langenkamp in front of the Nightmare on Elm Street house in Hollywood when I was
Oh,
at
wow.
Entertainment Tonight. So by the time that he sat down for this movie, he was very nice. He's like, I saw the movie, I really enjoyed it, and it's a hit. I like being in hits, David. He was very Hollywood speak, and I said that's super cool. But he was apologetic in a very nice way. He's just like, I know you from the, and that's why I wanted to do this, and I really enjoyed the movie, and that's why I wanted to do this and be in part 2. And I apologize if you couldn't get to me, because of people representation and that kind of stuff like that, because I'm happy to do this for you. And that really just made me very excited, and it just warmed our hearts.
Yeah.
So after spending countless hours making the first one, and then editing it down to 4.5 hours, were there, obviously there are new stories, but were there things that you thought you knew all about having done it the first time, then only to find there was like more and more layers that you didn't uncover? Do you know what I mean? Like, I would think that having done it once, you'd know everything. That would be it.
You'd be the ultimate expert.
Are you talking about me as a filmmaker, or one as a viewer from a second viewing?
For you as a filmmaker and a fan. Because you're a fan first, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, here's my card. It's my
exactly. We all have one. They're all in our wallet. But as a fan, you've heard these stories now, and now you've gotten like as deep as you think you can get, and then all of a sudden you get deeper.
Well, the format that we have when we film this stuff is ideal for this kind of movie, because we have the time. Everyone generously gives us at least an hour of their time, and they must be enjoying themselves, because they don't excuse themselves to go to the bathroom and never come back, after 45 minutes. And that's why we do end up sitting down for an extended period of time. But given that time frame, you can talk about all sorts of things. And obviously they want to cover, some of the stuff that they've done, but they really enjoy talking about things that they love themselves that aren't necessarily anything that they've been involved in. Or even for going back to Robert Englund, it's like he was in Dead and Buried. He was in Phantom of the Opera. He directed 976 Evil. He had a TV career and a movie career, even before he was Freddy Krueger, that he was really proud of, a stage career. And he got to talk about that stuff, and that stuff gets to be in the movie. And I think it provides a rounder, broader, more three-dimensional view of who Robert Englund is, as opposed to, in addition to his thoughts on, say, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, where I get to pair him with Robert Russler, who also co-starred with him in Nightmare 2, to talk about not only the making of that movie, but how that movie resonates in a whole different way than they may or may not have intended when that came out, if you guys know anything about Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
Yes.
And the connotations and what's on screen and what's implied and what's inferred.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I think learning about the people who you grew up watching is as interesting as hearing the stories about the movie itself. To find out that some of them hate horror, can't watch it, I think is just as interesting as knowing what their experiences were like on set.
Yeah, Heather Langenkamp and Nick Castle, who played, who's a director, but also played, the first Michael Myers. Yeah. He's the first to say, I don't really like scary movies. I get too scared. It's like, I love hearing that, because I want to, that's a jump off point to discuss the psychology of horror and fear, and why people see these movies or why people choose not to see them, and whether it makes them uncomfortable or is that it's their comfort blanket, what that all means to them. It's different for everybody. And I think we can connect through these icons of the era just as human beings and their thought process. I think it makes it much more of a human conversation. And that's what is so fun about this for me.
Before doing this second film, how much influence or ideas did you get from other fans who would watch the first one and said, hey, you got to do this, David, in the next one? Did you get a lot of that?
Well, I scoured the Loop and Larry social media feed saying, well, I really enjoyed this, but where the hell was Shocker? So, yeah, very much so. I joke, but I'm not joking in that I went through everybody's feed. I looked at all the feedback, positive and negative of the first one. You got to have a thick skin, but the idea is that for the most part, people really, if there was collectively, if you didn't like it, you didn't like it. But collectively, if there was any disappointment, it was that there wasn't Italian horror or world horror in there, or there were just a number of why wasn't the movie that I love so much in there, or why weren't some of the deeper cuts in there that I figured they would go to? Why such a reliance on franchises when there's so many other things? Yeah. And that was a tightrope walk on the first one because you want to appeal to fans. You want to appeal to newbies. You want to appeal, when you talk about the franchises, there's a way of alienating the fans if you only do one from the franchise. They're like, well, there's a whole franchise and you're ignoring that. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I very meticulously put this list together of what was mentioned the most, what people really wanted to see, what they hoped for if there was another 4.5-hour saga exploration in this decade. And we also, as a company, with all the people who had watched the first one, we polled them. We said, here's a poll of 10 movies, and here's a box to write in the things that aren't on this list of 10. What would you like to see the most in part 2? And we listened, and if it was on that poll, it's in there. So
that's really cool.
And it's cool that you could do that. It's cool that we could respond to these kind of things because I didn't think they were unrealistic asks. I mean, they were something that I wanted as well. Yeah. And like I said, the first movie, there was so much to tackle. It was kind of a reluctant choice to keep it as North American films because it's such an unwieldy decade with so much material. I kind of felt like the wider I would cast my net, the more would slip through my fingers. And I needed to keep it a little more concentrated. So, I'm just absolutely pleased that I get an opportunity to do a whole second film and get it presented to the world after, sort of a COVID hibernation, and get it to everyone a calendar year after we delivered the first one. So
that's
I'm pretty happy.
So yeah. How long was it after you finished the first one, you got it out, people had seen it, before you seriously started considering making the second?
Well, I read the first.
Before you answer that, you've also got a sci-fi doc, right? That's being done.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
I
gotta go.
That was announced first, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's this other doc. I'm like,
yeah.
Does David sleep? Is the question we were asking. Actually, is what we're.
You just did the equivalent of another stack on the desk just when I finished this work. No, we have In Search of Tomorrow coming up, the sci-fi documentary, and I was able to strategically get interviews while I was doing In Search of Darkness 2 interviews as well. So I actually have and some stuff, there's some crossover, but there's a lot of new material because I was back in shooting, a lot of new material and interviews. Got some really good stuff and so much more to do. Now sidetracking into In Search of Tomorrow. But to answer your question, how long did it take before I started working on In Search of Darkness 2? Well, I read the first review of In Search of Darkness after it premiered at Beyond Fest in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, they really like that. Oh, they like that. And this guy was really angry that there was no Shocker. He said, where's Shocker? And I said, okay. Shocker's the first on the list when I get to this next one. I don't know. I keep on bringing Shocker for shock effect. It's kind of fun.
So literally at the premiere, you're starting to piece together part 2.
And the reality of the answer is I'm being kind of fun and facetious. So, but it's like the first delivering this movie, there was In Search of Darkness Part 1, there was so much material that I was just like, if we don't make another crime, it's a crime if we don't use this material for something. If we don't make another movie, people were asking me, they're like, well, you must have so much stuff. We could use it for podcasts. Do you want to license that stuff out? I mean, people were soliciting to use that material. And I knew that we were sitting on a lot of gold, we're sort of Smog, from The Hobbit, sitting on just a gold mine. We're going to sleep on it for a little bit and then see how we use it.
So having done the first one and now the second one, were there any movies that came up in discussion that either you had sort of put at the back of your mind or sort of forgotten about that made you excited to go back and rewatch? Do you know what I mean? Like, did you think I really need to dive back into this series or this?
It would have to be the Italian horror, because my world growing up in terms of the 80s and seeing movies on the big screen and going to the video store, I never saw an Italian movie on the big screen, and if I did, I didn't know it was Italian. It was usually the mainstream stuff. It just didn't come my way. So it would either be sitting there on the shelves at the video store or not. Like if you went to Blockbuster, you might have, Suspiria, I'm sure was there, but you didn't see much. You didn't see much of that at all. You'd have to go to the mom and pop store, and if you didn't have Quentin Tarantino behind the desk renting your videos, you might not have ever known how great this stuff was. So I didn't discover a lot of that until much later. And I also knew that there was a lot that I still had yet to discover. And there's a lot of material. There's a lot of crazy stuff there. And there's a lot of stuff that I sort of sidestepped as well. I mean, I remember like Cannibal Holocaust. That's a movie that I have been educated to now realize that a lot of people value that film as a piece of history in terms of found footage. And, it wasn't real, but it was positioned as being real. And, Deodato, the director, was almost, he almost went to jail because they thought he killed people on camera.
Didn't he have to produce the crew or the cast?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's like, it's kind of dark territory. And I that's not something that is something that I personally gravitate to, though I'd seen pieces of it. But now I was just like, I need to see why. Need to see how this is relevant, why this is important, and to have, if there might still be an aversion to the content itself, there has to be a healthy respect as to its place in the story and the overall story. So there are definitely a lot of, and not every Italian movie is a cannibal found footage horror film, but I definitely went down the rabbit hole of Italian films, and I was tickled in probably the worst way about how they're obsessed with eye trauma and eye gouging and the eyes are the window to the soul, and they're perfect to poke out as well. And the Italian movies, they're like, if you thought our effects were insane, they just like pushed it over the edge. And so it's interesting to just see how that plays. And lastly, I'll say about that, how you watch an Italian film and you could see how much influence it had from American cinema. They do their version, but it's just way warped and way crazier and way over the top. And then America takes notice and says, hey, I want to make stuff like that. And it's this sort of cyclical effect where the likes of Brian De Palma or other filmmakers are, it's a back and forth with Argento and Fulci and Bava and Lenzi and people like that, where we all win at the end because the stuff is just bonkers crazy.
It is, absolutely. And it's interesting that you bring that up because I don't know about you, Lou, but I wasn't aware of the Italian subgenres either. Like they just weren't on maybe they were on the shelf. And it wasn't until the revival of Grindhouse. Here we have a group in London that started up Grindhouse theater again in the late 90s. And it wasn't until that revival and they started showing these sort of Gallo movies that I kind of went, what is this? And why have I never seen these things? And I was the perfect age when they came out and I missed them. But there is so much out there that you can't possibly have consumed it all at the time.
I mean, to put a fine point on it, and we can obviously move on from the Italian topic, but I think one of the things about Italian filmmaking that was off-putting to a lot of people was they were dubbed and they were dubbed badly. And so they, even if the lurid box art lured you into renting it, once you put it on, you're just like, the mouths and the words are not entirely connecting and synced, and what is going on, and it's clearly badly dubbed. And I think a lot of people couldn't quite get past that. But if you sort of take that as part of the overall package, there's an absolute appeal and nostalgia when you look back at those movies.
I do own Cannibal Holocaust, and it's still in cellophane. I think I've had it for like 6 years. I just can't. I've read so many things about it. I just can't bring myself, like you said, I can't bring myself to watch it. I know exactly what you're saying. So it's just sitting on the shelf. Eventually, one day I'll get to it. Yeah. So talk about a little bit about like the soundtrack, because I think as much as the film makes horror, I think and Italian's a good example of really cool soundtracks. Do you guys delve into that a little bit in this film as well? I know you did the last one.
Last time we had a whole chapter about sound, soundtracks, the score, the sound design, that kind of stuff like that. I didn't want to repeat chapters, so we don't have an individual chapter, but we definitely single out certain. Have you ever heard of a movie called Shocker? Shocker's got a great heavy metal soundtrack, and so like Chris Jericho, the wrestler, who's in our movie as well, who's a huge horror nut. I mean, he breaks down the Shocker soundtrack and who's in it, and why he loves it, and how metal. Other folks talk about how, especially when you talk about these Italian movies, heavy metal was actually very much ingrained in their soundtracks when they were, with their films. You look at a movie like Demons. We had Geretta, who was in Demons, playing, Rosemary. She talks about why that was important and why people connected with it. So yeah, you have that. I mean, Tangerine Dream did The Keep, for Michael Mann. Another film we talk about, Clancy Brown, who's in our film, he talks about why he loves The Keep. It's cool stuff, and the music is very important. The music for our film, we brought Weary Pines back to score the film. Neon Retrowave is doing a separate soundtrack of all the synthwave cool stuff. That's excellent. But Weary Pines are just amazing, and they created a nice handful of brand new tracks to complement the amazing work they did in the first round. So if that's what you mean, that's kind of what we talk about as well, but it's not in a concentrated chapter.
As a young David looking for movies at the movie store, going to Blockbuster Video or wherever you went, what appealed to you for horror? What was the kind of thing you would reach out and grab?
I responded a lot to supernatural horror and zombie films to a certain degree, but being a classic monster kid, if it had a monster, I was more interested. If it was a slasher, I was less interested. The caveat is that Halloween is probably my all-time favorite film of the horror genre. That and American Werewolf in London are probably the top two, next to all the classic Universal horror stuff. So you have something like Fright Night comes along and, it's vampires or, Monster Squad, all that kind of stuff like that. That's the stuff that appealed to me, but I was the guy who read the back, and first I'd check, creatures, TNA, rated R. Okay, okay, I'll keep reading. And then I'd see if I'd recognize any names or, if the concept appealed to me and stuff like that. But I was half and half when it came to recognition of, did I know this already versus I've never heard of this. What is it? The box art really made such a huge difference. Yeah. But I was definitely susceptible to the marketing, where if the poster was on the wall or if it was in the staff picks, I would definitely connect with it, saying, let me explore this myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you remember Larry having when we were kids? We have a Jumbo Video, which is like a Blockbuster. I don't know if you had this or not, but we had they used to have like a castle in the corner. It looked like an old castle, and all the horror movies were in this castle.
Oh, cool!
Which is really cool. So, but they had like everything, like all the normal ones, but then like Gourmet Zombie Chef from Hell would be in there. You'd rent that because you didn't know what it was, and it looked cool, right? Like the name was cool. I often would just go off the name of it, like based on that. I don't know about Larry, what would appeal to you.
Well, it's funny because when you talked about reading the back of the box for the illicit content, I mean, I think we all did that. We were all like, mid-teens, and we were all like, what's this? You're not going to find this in a rom-com.
Right, exactly.
So I think that's where it all began for most people, is like, this is kind of interesting. What's going on here? And then it branches out. Then you look at the box art, and then that's pretty cool. I could watch this movie. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was a big part of it was the box art. It's like when you go to the liquor store and you want to buy a bottle of wine and you look at the label. Oh, it's a nice label. It must be good wine.
Exactly.
Sort of the same thing. You look at the box art. But
I can pronounce schnapps. I'll take that.
Exactly. What's that about? Have your tastes in horror changed? Like you started as, being interested in supernatural. Have they changed at all? Like if you were to sit down today and look for a new horror movie, what sort of content would you be looking for?
It's funny. As an adult, it's funny. I can understand. I understand the construction of films really well.
Yeah.
But I'm still a wuss when it comes to jump scares. And so, if it's like jump scare central, I usually pass on it. Or like I find sometimes the mundane is scarier than anything else, like a paranormal activity or something like that, where just the fact that it's taken its damn time to get to where it's going, and I know where it's going, and the anticipation is what's killing you, because you're just like, you're getting more and more wound up knowing that nothing's happened yet, so it's really going to go down. That's the kind of stuff that I don't like as much, and I can sort of smell that coming. But my appreciation for horror in general has not quite evolved, but my appreciation for a lot of the stuff that I kind of dismissed in the past, I have a brand new appreciation and affection for, especially with the decade of the 80s. There were a lot of films where I was just like, oh, it's clearly just a rubber mask, or oh, it's just bad effects, or oh, it's just a body count, and oh, they're just trying to capitalize on creating a brand new horror villain so they could have a bunch of sequels and stuff like that. But I revel a lot more in the craft of the filmmaking and the scare and even the casting. And, if there's creativity, I'm shocked at some of these movies where I thought it's such a low budget piece of crap. That's what I thought. And then I'd go back and I'd revisit it. I'm like, they put a lot of effort in the sets, in the camera coverage, in the crafting of this story. And I dismissed it because it looked like a rubber monster at the end. There's a lot more going on here. And having worked on movies myself where no one sets out to make a bad movie, even if it becomes a bad movie, you really do put your blood, sweat, and tears in it. I have just a different appreciation for the type of entertainment that gets put out there.
I think that's really important when you're watching horror, because I think a lot of horror can get caught up in how cheesy it is, and you forget the nuances. Do you know what I mean? You forget the lighting effects and how they've really created atmosphere, because the monster looks kind of rubber. But but there's so much more that's happening around it that you don't really even pay attention to. For example, even like Hellraiser, like it's not a great example, but like those effects were phenomenal. But even if you look past the characters, Pinhead and all of the Cenobites, and you look at the rooms that they're standing in, like those are decrepit, horrible looking places that are, that they're not necessarily supposed to stand out, but somebody put a lot of work and a lot of thought.
Yeah, the attention to detail is really, listen, all they need to do is a little dusting, a little mopping, and it'll look great. But there's that one little detail for My Bloody Valentine, which I always find amusing, in that they filmed in this mine, and because the mine company knew they were going to be filming there, they cleaned it up. And then they got there and they're just like, this place is pristine. Oh no, we have to dirty it up because it doesn't look like an active mine, or an abandoned mine. So it's kind of that kind of thing. Yeah. But I gravitate a lot more to the overall, if it has to do with, yes, the supernatural, but just sort of the phantasmagorical, the things that are just not based in reality are more interesting to me. But I also want to add that, especially after like 2 years of 80s horror movies, I've seen every possible kill you can kill someone with. And so the creativity of the kills is something that I go, oh, I might not have liked this movie, but touche, that was a great kill. Good job. Very creative.
Do you ever worry about yourself when you think that?
Yeah, I know exactly.
Well, I was going to say that's the age old, what's wrong with people who love horror? They must be mass murderers themselves. But it's cathartic and it's not real. We all know that. And there's a certain embracing of that material that makes us a lot more engaged in how different it is from the horrid reality of the same kind of stuff. A lot of people can't differentiate the two, and so they don't understand. And so, not to get too serious all about it, but
it's true.
Nope, I'm not a mass murderer. It's too hard to dispose of a body. Haven't you seen Dexter?
Yeah, exactly. Even he had to come back to redo it now, apparently. So he wasn't quite done. Yeah, but
listen, Luminol ruined it for everybody. That's the spray where you could see even if you clean the blood, you could see
it's still there. But tell us about your this new doc and how people can get involved with this doc. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, so go to 80shorrordoc.com. We're only offering it between now and Halloween at midnight. And it's the movie, but there's a lot more stuff. And it's like a super cool package. And I appreciate you guys asking because it is a limited time. And what ultimately happens is people, they clue in and they say, well, I'm sure it's going to be available on streaming, or I'll get it on iTunes, I'll just wait, because that's how these things happen. It actually doesn't work that way. We have no plans after this. This is where we want to sell it now, and we create a real great package. So you can get your name in the credits with all the other folks who are in there. It comes with 3 super duper cool posters. And an enamel pin. It comes with the movie, where it's either a Blu-ray or a DVD physical copy, but you also get a digital copy of In Search of Darkness Part 2. You also get a free In Search of Darkness Part 1 digital copy. And if you missed your chance because you're a completist and you want to have it in your hand also, for an extra add-on, you can get the DVD or the Blu-ray for In Search of Darkness Part 1 as well. But on top of all that stuff, and the soundtrack, and a slipcover, and a set of Ginsu knives, you get what's really, really cool is that we've built this online community on Discord. And you get a 12-month pass free to get this online community where we're doing watch parties all the time. I think it's every other week. We're doing it also with In Search of Tomorrow. So each week, on one side, one Sunday you've got In Search of Tomorrow, another Sunday you've got In Search of Darkness. This connects you with In Search of Darkness, where you get a Q&A with someone from an 80s horror film. Like the first one we did was a watch party of Reanimator, and we had Jeffrey Combs come on.
That's
and
awesome.
interact with the fans in the crowd. And he just loves the fact that everyone is happy to talk with him, and he loves sharing nuggets and insight, and it's just super cool. And it's a really welcoming community, and it's a wonderful extension of this thing that we built that's kind of by the fans for the fans. So you buy this package between now and Halloween at midnight, you get like 9 hours of movie if you put one movie and another movie back to back, if you want to sit that whole time or take some breaks. But you also get this 12-month community element and this sort of connective tissue of, now more than ever that half of us are stuck inside because of COVID. It's really cool to connect with like-minded fans and collectors sharing their collectibles. And it's not a judgmental community. It's a very welcoming community. It's not cynical. It's not condescending. It's just cool and fun. So you just go to 80shorrordoc.com for In Search of Darkness Part 2 and all these cool things that are listed there. And all the socials are at 80shorrordoc on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram.
Yeah, you've got to follow you on Twitter and the socials. You must be. Who does your socials? Do you do it? Because if you do that on top of everything else, you're pretty busy.
We have a real concentrated team that does all of the stuff that makes this movie, that puts it out, that does the social media. We have like 13 or 14 people at any given time doing this all ourselves. It's a great, resourceful, wonderful team. I do my social media on Tiki At Twitter, I'm Tiki Ambassador, and I also have my own genre pop culture site called itcamefromblog.com. And so that's at itcamefromblog on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. But yeah, you can interact with me, and I love chit-chatting with people and just sharing brain nuggets of just pop culture fun.
Well, that's I think what makes these docs so much more than just documentaries, is that it really is bringing a community together. I mean, you've gone beyond just sitting on the couch and watching some people talk about their movie experiences, is that you've opened it up, because I mean, horror is, I mean, it's a massive genre, but it's still got limited appeal. You know what I mean? Like, it's not everybody is going to love of horror, and the people who do really like it and really want to talk about it and come together. And, you know, so when you offer all of these extras, you've just like opened up a world that's just revolving around these movies, and it's great.
Well, I'm glad you recognize that, because we really are fans. It's not like we're some production company that sees an opportunity, makes a movie, puts it out, you buy it, and then we move on and that's it. You know, obviously we're doing more. Obviously we're building more around it, and it is a fan collective where we really feed off of the feedback, and we feed off the interaction. We feed off the love of that people are just expressing when these movies that meant so much to them are getting the love finally and respect finally sometimes that they've always felt they deserved, and they're getting to share it with the masses. It's a different experience than just sort of like the consumer supply or demand kind of experience. And
I think with retro too, like with the fact that we love these movies so much, we also love the stories behind these movies, because we want to see how these were made and what these people thought of them now, and all their experiences with it. So that's why, if you have not watched this documentary, I'm going to do this plea right now. You got to watch the first one, and you got to buy the second one. I think most horror fans own most of the movies that they want to see. Like, I think we're more collectors of the actual physical copies, but you've got to get this, because it's such a cool just overview of 80s horror. I just love it. I can watch it again, and yeah, you can see it on Shudder, but it's not going to Shudder forever. But you can own that copy forever. So I just did a whole commercial for you right there.
Well, I appreciate it. What I really love most about this movie, other than that, it's just a parade of amazing imagery that makes you want to immediately, you know, watch a bit, watch in chunks, and then go straight to your list. I mean, what's so wonderful now is, now that it's on, a whole new audience has discovered it on Shudder. They're all making their Halloween lists based on In Search of Darkness. And they're like, you know, I'd never heard of Society before, but now everyone's talking about the shunting. I got to figure out what this is all about, you know?
I actually did that exact thing.
Did you?
With that movie, I had never heard of the movie before. I watched the doc and I was like, I need to do this. And so I finished the doc and got Society and had to watch it.
Yeah, I just brought up my list that I have, like I made of all these movies, like Q and Motel Hell and all these ones, and these are movies to buy list, I call it. So these are movies I eventually are just kind of looking for, and there's like probably like 40, because as I'm watching the movie, I'm writing these down as I'm watching it. So I'm like pausing it, and I'm like I got to see this one and got to see this one, because as many movies you think you saw in the 80s, you guys bring up a ton more that I either maybe barely remember or I never saw. Well, like I just saw The Entity the other day. I've never seen The Entity in my life, and I just saw it for the first time the other day.
Well, The Entity is in Search of Darkness Part 2.
Well, it's so. I see, now I want to see what like the background behind it, because it's such a great movie.
I'm sure you didn't set out to make a shopping list, but I feel like that's what you ended up doing.
Well, I read a canticle for Leibowitz when I was in high school, and you know, shopping lists are like sacred parchment for me. That's like a deep cut, you know, side factoid. Look up for canticle for Leibowitz, and it'll all make sense to you.
Okay. Another thing for the shopping list.
But two things that I wanted to mention. One, I think what I personally love about this is that I have so many people talking about other movies and not their own, and the ones that they love and that brought them joy, and they really, you know, it moved them in one way or another. You know, my mission statement for this movie is very much that it's all about curation. And there's a whole generation that is discovering this whole decade, but they don't even know where to start. So a movie like this is a great sort of, it's sort of a primer for a lot of these movies. And part two, it just goes on deeper cuts and it just a broader view, but it's still essentially the same thing. And so it's important to share this stuff and share your love and share why it's important, because for everyone, it's kind of on an even playing field. All these things are important to us for our own personal reasons, but a lot of people, they don't even know where to start, because we talk about how we love them, but it's important to talk about why we love them. And it's important to recognize that all these movies are on the foundation of movies that came before them. The people who made the movies in the 80s watched movies as a kid in the 50s, and they saw the classic monsters and the Roger Corman B movies and all the kind of atomic era stuff that they wanted to put pieces of that, if not wholly remake them, in the 80s for their own filmmaking. And so I think it's important to recognize that there's a lot of movies that came before the 80s and came before today. And it's important to understand why they're important and why they're influential.
So could you go over, David, one more time before we go here, the website and everything else we need to know? Because we need to order this. Both Larry and I we're already ordered. We're ready to go.
We both placed our orders. We're expecting to see our names in the credits.
Excellent. And you could put anything you want in the credits. If you want to put Loop and Larry, you could do that. I mean, there's anything you want to do. Yeah, if you want to promote your show. But it's like you go to 80shorrordoc.com. The clock is definitely ticking, because after Halloween at midnight, we all turn into pumpkins, and that's that. It's not going to be available. So you got to act now. So go to 80shorrordoc.com, and just remember that you're getting all sorts of cool swag and this 12-month community on top of, if you put the two movies together, like 9 hours of 80s horror goodness. So I think it's a pretty good deal.
Awesome.
It's a great deal.
Well, thank you so much, David, for joining us once again. We're just saying, every season you've been on so far of our show, so we'll keep it going. We'll keep it rolling.
Well, I love chatting with you guys. I always love your geek enthusiasm. And listen, anyone who's got the Wilhelm in their opening every single time I hear it, then that's geek cred right there.
And one last question: when's the release, do you hope, of this movie?
So the release is, you're going to be able to see it you're going to be able to see the digital version of it November 17th, and then it'll be shipped in December. So you should get it, very, very soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much once again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's always a pleasure.
We'll talk again.
That's it for our Halloween Geektacular.
That was about as geektacular as you can get right there.
Thanks a lot, David, and thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Loop and Larry, Guardians of Geek.
Bye-bye.
Produced by Matthew C. Loop and Lawrence Simner. A Loop and Larry production.
Bueller.
He likes it. Hey, Mikey.
Bueller.
Bad news. Fog is getting thicker.
And Leon's getting larger.
Inconceivable. Brian's right. It's an elf.
Wax on.
Does Barry Manilow know that you raid his wardrobe?
Oh, Captain, my Captain.
Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Wax off.